Okay, hi everyone, back again, and this time it's with I Tonya, and I'm old enough that I lived through the Tonya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan fiasco, and although it wasn't that big a deal in Australia, because it was played out at the Olympics and everyone watches the Olympics, I kind of remember hating Tonya Harding and loving Nancy Kerrigan and kind of picking sides. So this is an interesting film. It's got a real Aussie feel to it because Craig Gillespie is an Aussie. He's the director. Margot Robbie is the star, and she was also a producer. So it's got a little bit of that Aussie irreverence to the whole thing. So as usual, should you see it, then I come back and tell you a little bit about it, and then we do spoilers. So the quick upshot is, should you see it? Well, this is an interesting film. It's a crazy topic, and I think if you are at all interested in how people are played out in the public sphere, if you like the Tonya Harding, if you're a big fan of Margot Robbie, or if you're a fan of the Oscars and want to see everything, there's a couple of nominations which come out of this, then you should go see it. But if you're not your cup of tea, it's right on the border where, you know, it could wait for maybe TV. So I'll leave that there and I'll be back in a second to talk about it. Okay, bye. Okay, so let's talk about I Tonya. I'm not going to go through all the details of what happens in I Tonya or in what happened in real life, and the two are maybe linked. It's hard to tell. I mean, the film begins with Gillespie is put in a thing saying, you know, he had so many contradictory takes on this film and what people did that he just put them all in, and it actually is quite an interesting thing. He breaks a lot of rules. So this film starts over with voiceovers. Often the characters will break the fourth wall. They'll talk straight to the audience, and it's all very like a mishmash. Think it's like Goodfellas meets a biopic. So it is got a really odd kind of ambiance to it. It's got a weird energy, but really it's the story of Tonya Harding, who was this great skater, but skated in a way different to nearly everyone else. She was more like an ice hockey player who just happened to be a great figure skater in that genteel world. And famously, she did very well and she won numerous competitions, and her big rival was Nancy Kerrigan, who really played the princess, and Tonya Harding was real kind of redneck kind of thing, grew up really in a hard world, and depending on who you believe, the way it turned out was through her boyfriend and others. Somehow the order was given, and while Nancy Kerrigan was getting ready for the American trials to see who'd go to Lillehammer, a guy breaks in to the training facility and uses this, you know, like one of those police batons, and breaks her kneecap. And it's just scandalous in a million ways. It's such a stupid thing to do. It's nothing that most people would even cross their minds, and you're not quite sure. So, the number one story coming out of this is probably Margot Robbie. So Margot Robbie is both the producer and the star. She is in nearly every frame of the movie, apart from the beginning, which is about the childhood of Tonya. And I will say this, she got an Oscar nomination, and she deserves an Oscar nomination, but she is really redlining right up to her ability. And why I'm saying that is, for most of the film, she does a really, really good job, and I think she does get the inner psychology of this character. But there are also moments where you go, this just isn't quite, you can see she's working, she's acting. And the difference is when you can't tell. Like when you watch Daniel Day-Lewis, you can't tell he's acting. Margot, you can tell certain times. She's done no favors by two things which happen in this film. One is they start her off at 15, and really she's, by the end of the film, she's, they mix historical things and as if people are giving their testimony today. So if you think about that, Tonya must be about 40 something now, and Margot Robbie enters the film at around 15. That's a big range, and she just can't quite pull that off. The other thing which does her no favors is because no one can really do, apart from really professional skaters, and when I say professional, I mean people who are headed for the Olympics, they can't really do the stuff that Tonya Harding was doing. So how do you do that? Margot Robbie can't learn that. There's like 2 people in the world who can do a triple axel. So what they do is they get people to do it, and then they try to put her face on their body, and they use this kind of weird green screen and it just does not work. When it's happening, you go, what is this? This is bad. And it really kicks you out of the film. So that's not Margot's fault. That's just, I don't know how else you would do it, but she couldn't De Niro it. Like when Robert De Niro did Raging Bull, people said he could have turned pro and become a boxer. She just wasn't able to do. It's a completely different kind of thing anyway. But so that happens. The other thing which we'll talk about a bit later, but which changes the structure of the film, is the way they go from her childhood to the top. And the childhood is all dominated by her mother, played by Alison Janney. And she is nominated for an Oscar, and she's going to go really close. It'll be between her probably and Laurie Metcalf for Lady Bird. And she is absolutely outstanding. She works with a very young actress for nearly most of the first act named Grace McKenna. Grace McKenna is brilliant. So those two are just so much better than everyone else in the film that it's a little bit, the film really suffers because there's this great first act and then you go to the others and they're just not able to keep it going. The other problem is the way they structure it. So you have this great first act, and then, I don't know how interested you are in the whole Tonya Harding thing, but they go through every single bit of it and all the minutiae of this fiasco, and yeah, it can get a bit grueling. Film goes way too long, and the problem is Margot Robbie and I think it's Sebastian Stan plays Galuli, the boyfriend slash husband slash ex-husband, and they're just not able to have the charisma burn to get you through some of the drier parts of it. So overall, look, it's a really good film. It's an interesting film. I'll probably go to spoilers and we'll talk about some of the things that I think this film is trying to say. So I'll be back in a second. Spoilers, but no spoilers, because we all know what happened with Tonya Harding, and she has a meltdown in Lilyhammer, and famously her laces break, and it's all kind of just horrible. Nancy Kerrigan wins the silver, and famously also looks like she'd rather shoot herself than get a silver medal instead of gold. So people always remember those kind of two things. This film is trying to do an interesting thing, which is you go through this film and you see this incredibly bad upbringing that Tonya Harding had to go through. Her mother is borderline a monster. Janney saves it just through her incredible charisma and wit, but she could easily be just a complete villain. That plus then she goes out with Galuli, who, you know, she claims incredible amount of domestic violence. And so you aren't sure who is the victim here. So on paper, the victim is Nancy Kerrigan, but is the victim Tonya Harding? Did she ever actually have a chance to outgrow this atmosphere and this, you know, the way she grew up? are the victims us? Because this is the first story. People talk about O.J. Simpson, but really this is probably the first story which really kicked off that 24/7 news cycle where reporters would invent things and ring them up and do stuff because there was so much interest. So are we the victim because this was the beginning of us having that completely celebrity focus matched with a new form of media in terms of cable news and such. They also talk a lot about domestic violence, and I'm not sure if it plays correct. The way it goes is this is a dark comedy, and what you find is when Tonya, who's often the recipient of all this violence, although she does give as good as she gets to the husband in some respects, there was laughter in the theatre, and I always feel very uncomfortable with that. But the way it's played is often she gets beaten up and then she'll look at the camera and go, "This was my day," or something like that. And it puts the audience in a very interesting perspective as a witness to this behaviour, and yet Tonya's not playing it as a victim. So you could not see this film, I don't think, if you had experienced domestic violence, because you would hear people laughing, and it's very interesting, the line that it's really threading here, and I'm not completely sure it works. The film overall doesn't work for me completely because it's just got such a saggy second act and it loses all its momentum. So by the time that you've got the real killer scenes, which are towards the end and when Nancy is attacked, apart from the time when Tonya Harding does in real life the triple axel and they show Margot Robbie doing it, and she's pretty spot on with how she does the acting for that. That's probably one of the highlights of the film, despite the weird CGI. So you have this very strange thing about victimhood, domestic violence. What it does do, which I think is interesting, is me thinking back on how I just hated Tonya Harding and thought she was just such a white trash kind of redneck, and I really had no empathy for her. I was quite young in my behalf, but yeah, I really had no empathy for her at all. And you do come out of the end of this film thinking, okay, maybe there's a lot more to this story. And interestingly, Nancy Kerrigan is kind of quite angry about this film because she says this makes out Tonya to be, quite sympathetic, and I'm the one who had my leg bashed in and it cost me a gold medal. And so it's very interesting the way it travels through. I don't think it's the greatest film. I think it's an interesting film. It's certainly not a bad film to go and see, but it's probably not the one. Margot Robbie's not going to win. She knows that. Janie will go pretty close. She's by far the star of the film. So that's it for today. Not too much to talk about really, but as I've said before, a ton of films coming. So I'm going to wrap this up. Please subscribe if you like what I'm doing. Hit the bell and then you'll always know when I've got new material. And I'm on Twitter at Guru Eden. So I'll see you in a couple of days. Okay, bye.